Imagine ignoring signs that not only predict your downfall, but also foretell a disaster that would end a dynasty. This is the real story of the Romanov family. In this video, you'll explore the ignored warnings and red flags that haunted the Romanovs, from mystical prophecies to political missteps leading up to the chilling end of an entire royal line. You'll uncover how Nicholas and Alexandra's personal choices are intertwined with national tragedy, shaping the course of Russian history. Stay with us to discover how overlooked omens and royal decisions spiraled into one of the most catastrophic events in history. Don't miss the untold secrets that could have changed the fate of the Romanovs, which cost not only their lives, but also those of their 5 children: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei. This story is heavy metal. Nicholas Romanov and Alexandra Hess were 16 and 15 years old respectively when they first met at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg on the occasion of her older sister's event. Notice that they were young, but they already liked each other. They matched. Alexandra was the daughter of the German Grand Duke Louis IV of Hesse and Princess Alice of the United Kingdom. Therefore, she was the granddaughter of Bravo Queen Victoria of England. Okay, first signal. Queen Victoria wanted Alexandra, her favorite granddaughter, to marry her son Edward, who was also the heir to the throne. She wanted Alexandra to be the Queen of England, but Alexandra didn't like this guy and said, "I don't want to. I'm not interested in this guy." The thing about Alexandra and Nicholas is that it was so strong because they liked each other so much that they spent 6 years writing letters until they saw each other again, and then decided to get married, no matter what anyone else said. The second sign of fate. Queen Victoria said to her granddaughter, "Are you saying this boy is suitable for you? I don't see it clearly." And his parents also told him they didn't really like the idea of him marrying a German woman. But they ignored everything and got engaged. And here begins the disaster. Because 6 months later, Nicholas's father dies suddenly and he becomes the Tsar. The third sign of fate is very strong because the Russians meet their future empress at the funeral of Alexander III dressed in mourning, which the Russians consider a sign of a bad omen. Well, wait, because more signs are coming. They got married on November 26, 1894, and on the day of their coronation there was a huge upheaval. Here comes the fourth sign. On the day of the coronation of Nicholas and Alexandra, a crowd was celebrating a festival in honor of the coronation, and there was a human stampede. Hundreds of people died. What happened sowed the seeds of hatred that the Russians later felt toward their Tsars. Nicholas and Alexandra said, "Hey, we're going to suspend the dance at the French embassy because a lot of people have died, and it's going to look bad if they see us dancing." But the Tsar's advisors told them, "You can't look bad to the French. You have to go to the dance." And they went to the dance, which was very poorly viewed by the Russian people. All this while, the Russian people did not look favorably at the Empress. They compared her to Marie Antoinette since she wore large headdresses and was dressed in the finest clothes. And they did not realize how complicated the country's situation was. He also was not very popular because of what happened when a large crowd gathered at the gates of the Winter Palace. They complained that the living conditions of the people were not appropriate, and they thought it was wrong for the Tsars to live in such opulence. And Nicholas could think of nothing better to disperse the crowd than to have his soldiers shoot them. More than 1,000 people died, including many women and children. This day went down in history as Bloody Sunday. Amidst all these ominous signs, there were quieter but equally telling warnings in the personal dynamics between Nicholas and Alexandra themselves. Despite their strong mutual affection, their personalities and governing styles were dangerously mismatched for the leadership that Russia so desperately needed. Alexandra, deeply influenced by her upbringing in a more controlled and dignified English court, pushed Nicholas towards autocracy, a style of governance that increasingly alienated the Russian populace. Nicholas, often seen as indecisive and overly influenced by his wife, failed to grasp the mounting discontent among his people. This misalignment in their leadership approach subtly sowed the seeds of their downfall, making them blind to the growing crisis that would eventually engulf their reign and their family. More signs. In Russia, the Salic law was still in effect, meaning only boys could inherit the throne, and the empress, check this out, only gave birth to girls. Another sign with regard to lineage, when the heir finally arrived, Alexei was born with hemophilia, a disease he inherited from his mother, who in turn inherited it from her mother and grandmother, Queen Victoria. the one who introduced this disease into royal families across Europe. Little Alexei had very delicate health. It was very dangerous for him to receive any kind of bump because it could be fatal. Then the infamous Rasputin, a Siberian mystic, came onto the scene, telling the Tsars the idea, saying, "Hey, I'm going to cure your son. I will hypnotize him and you'll see he'll get better." What happens next? World War I is already underway, the Tsar goes to the front, and the Empress stays back with Rasputin. The people start saying, hey, there's something going on between the Empress and Rasputin. But not just that, it also begins to be said that Rasputin is making governmental decisions behind the scenes. Rasputin was eventually killed, but the damage was already done. The people hated the Tsars. They also blamed the Tsar for sending many Russian soldiers to their deaths in World War I, and upon his return from the front, he was detained and forced to abdicate. What happens? Nicholas was the Tsar, but was a bit clueless because when they told him, you have to abdicate, he said, oh, okay. Then he, the Empress, and all their children locked themselves in the Winter Palace, and they were told, hey, you have to leave here. Things are getting very ugly. But they said, no, the people would never harm us. They love us. And they said, they can't stand us. Another sign, my loves, this is very heavy. Tuesday, July 17th, 1917. Keep this date in mind. George V, King of England and cousin of Tsar Nicholas II, signs a document renouncing his German surname and changes it to Windsor. This document was signed exactly 1 year before the death or assassination of the Romanov family, and George V could have saved his cousin and the Empress, who was also his cousin, and their entire family. In fact, a ship was prepared to evacuate them from Russia, but he said, oh dear, if I save them and bring them to England, maybe here too a revolution like the Russian one might start. And he played dumb, even though he was English. I talk about this topic in this week's episode of my podcast. The Romanovs were moved to the Ipatiev house in the Russian Urals, where they stayed for several months. At no point did they suspect what was going to happen, but in the early hours of July 16th to 17th at 1:30 in the morning, the soldiers woke them up and ordered them to go down to the basement. They were not aware that they were going to die until they saw the soldiers drawing their weapons. Despite the legend that said Anastasia had survived, that is not the case. Everyone died, but it's inevitable to ask ourselves this question. If Nicholas and Alexandra had listened to their relatives and all the signs that fate was sending them, warning them not to get married, could this tragedy have been avoided? We will never know.